afternoon everybody, and welcome to the How to Craft Network. My name's Claire Manning from Thirsty Brush, and I'm going to be doing a watercolour video today for you using a brand new Thirsty Brush 12 colour watercolour palette with the brush and all the mixing trays. So we'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But I really wanted to do a video to give you some inspiration in case you haven't used watercolour before, you need some new ideas, or you're not getting the results you want, and hopefully we can pick up some tips and tricks for you. So I hope you've had a great week. Thank you for tuning in to Wednesday's shows with the new So Sweet collection and the launch of this palette. So I hope you got everything that you wanted, and we can give you some ideas today. So to go through what I've got some low tack tape I'm going to use to tape down my piece of watercolour card. I've got some Carter by Stamps by Me watercolour paper, which is tons and tons of cotton content in there, and it's a really good quality textured watercolour card that holds tons of water. Got a pot of water, various brushes, and of course my watercolour palette. Oh, and finally a little bit of kitchen roll. I find if I need something extra to soak up any water or wipe my brushes down. So let's first of all tape my piece of watercolour paper or card in place. I tend to call it card because it is 300 GSM. And this is going to give us a clean crisp border of our artwork, but also stop it moving around or any warping while I'm colouring. To be honest, this watercolour card is such good quality, it doesn't move much anyway, but it saves me slipping accidentally and making any mistakes. So just 4 pieces all the way around, and then I'm going to mix up a couple of the main colours I'm going to need, which are pretty much the 2 blues. So there's this lighter blue here. Just get plenty of water on my brush. So I'm just going to transfer some to the palette, the mixing part. Really lovely and vibrant, and then we can mix in other colours if we need to dull things down if we need to, or lighten things up. But that's the main blue colour. I'm going to do like a scenic thing. I'm getting more and more into landscape painting. This isn't a true to life landscape I'm doing though, it's just a misty, beautiful trees, and hopefully get some real atmosphere. And you can see this darker blue, which is the middle one out of these 3 that probably look the same on the camera, but they are a dark green, a dark blue and a black. And you can see once you add your water how deep and beautiful that blue is. And then just to get ahead of time, I'm going to do our black, as we'll need that for some silhouette trees as well. Don't need much water with that one. Okay, with just a little bit of that black still on the brush, I'm just going to dull down that blue, that first blue, very slightly. Can you see it's almost giving it a kind of blue-grey tinge? And that's absolutely great. That's exactly what I want. Right. So the first thing to do is I'm going to add in, this is different to what I did on the TV show. I'm going to add in a little bit of sky behind what my initial painting will be, and a kind of misty sky. I'm using the largest brush and just some clean water, and down to about just before half, just plenty of water. And then I'm going to start adding in some of that blue and just kind of almost letting it do its own thing. I don't need it too dark. And I'm not going to do much with it. Okay, just going to let that dry off for a moment. Okay, that's pretty much dry. It's not 100%, but that'll do. And I'm going to get a slightly smaller brush. And what size shall I use? Let's do the 8. And I'm going to get some of that darker blue. And I'm going to start to bring in some trees, but I want them to look almost like they're on a mountain. So like just on the horizon. And they're coming down. And then while this is still wet, I added a bit of water to my brush. And I'm just softening. This is how you get that misty look. I'm softening the underneath. Using the tip of my brush to get texture, different heights, different strokes. And to come down to almost the edge, but not quite. Keep adding more and more water to your brush to soften it out. If you need to take any extra colour out, like I did the other day, you can use some kitchen roll. Just play around with it until it looks as you want. This is, imagine if you've ever driven through somewhere like Scotland and there's all those beautiful, are they pine trees all on the hills as you go up into Scotland, and how they might look, or in the mist. So I'm just going to dry that off before we add the next layer. Okay, so for the next layer I've added even more of that dark blue and a tiny bit of the black into there, and not much water really. I can always keep this handy or use my sponge if I feel like I've got too much water on. But this next layer is going to feel, because it's now more in the foreground, it's going to feel darker, but we want to do essentially the same kind of thing. But just make the colour a little bit more concentrated. You can see now the one in the background is dried off. It's gone back a little bit in terms of colour. This one, plenty of colour on the brush, so you get those really deep. And just these lines. Don't forget, while it's still wet, before it dries off, add a little bit of colour to your brush and start to soften that bottom edge. Don't wait until you've gone all the way across, because your lines may have dried. You can tell when you're still working and you've still got that shine on your work. That's when you can still move the colour around. This is what gives it that misty look. Bit more water on the brush and just softening the lines so it bleeds. And then if you want to go back in with more trees, much less water on your brush again and plenty of colour. It will all blend in together really beautifully. You see how deep those ones are compared to the previous layer? I've added a few kind of at the end there as well. Just one last soften. Bring that down a little bit, that blue. Almost to the bottom of your page, but not quite. Okay, just dry that off now. You can either let it dry by itself or use the heat tool that I'm going to do now just for quickness. So I seem to have lost a little bit of footage of doing the trees in the foreground after doing mountains and trees. So this is the little bit I've just done with some black and some trees in the foreground. So let me just show you the technique of that again, just to make sure that you can do it. So you dry off that second layer, or third layer really, isn't it? You've got layer 1, your sky, layer 2, your first lot of trees or mountains, layer 3, your darker ones, and then once this bottom portion is completely dry, this is what I'll do with the black paint. So let's get some black in my palette and very little water here, not as much anywhere near as we were doing the mountains, and using the tip of the brush and a very, very light stroke, I'm doing some different height. This is where the trees are going to be placed at the front. Different lengths, different heights. Just in a guide for me, really, to go in then with the black paint and add in the foliage. So you're using like a stippling motion, going from a point at the top, leaving some gaps, just dabbing and then sometimes dragging the brush a little bit and coming out. It's almost like a Christmas tree shape, isn't it? Keep it quite dark. This one will be going off the page a little bit. Okay, then I tend to, while that one's drying, skip to the next one along. So skip that one and then go to the next one and start that next tree. That same stippling motion. Just little dabs with the brush, not too much water and plenty of paint. Don't be scared that it's black. It's going to give the illusion of the foreground and shadow and give it real depth. Okay, skip one and then go again. Try and make some wider than others, some taller than others. You don't have to go right down to the bottom with all of them. You can always add in some extra foliage here if you want to, as the area's dry. Just keep working across. And you will see how those sticks turn into these beautiful pine trees with tons and tons of texture. These buns aren't quite dry, so I'm just going to quickly blast them. And then you'll be able to go in and do the one in between, and it will layer on top then without smudging into a big black blob. I mean, there will be some overlap and that's absolutely fine, but when you see the texture of overlapping when they're dry is completely different than letting it all blend into each other and it just becomes one blob of paint. This is very different. This is very purposeful and overlapping, and if you keep the one in the front slightly darker as well, it will add to that illusion of depth. So same again as I work, just work across, doing that same thing, deeper if you can for the foreground ones. And that just takes practice, knowing how much water to add to your paint. Don't expect this kind of thing to be perfect the first time you try it, particularly if you're not used to using watercolours, even just for simple washes on your stamps. But that's the technique to get this result. The final couple of things I just added in here, I used a teeny weeny little brush. What size is this? This is a 0, to add in some tiny little birds. Can you see those? And then just to give the illusion again of more depth, I've added a tiny bit of stippled green and brown just at the front. You can barely make it out, just over the top of the dry black trees. Just that if this was a scene, say, like I say, going through Scotland or something, driving through those hills, and in the foreground you would start to get a little bit more, as you come out the mist, a little bit more of the sensation of the colours of the foliage. So guys, I really hope that you have a go at that and it's given you some ideas for with your watercolours, and that's a really great way to practice loads of different brush strokes, because you've got a gentle wash here, you've got using strokes and then blending out the bottom of the mountains to create mist with lots of water, and then you've got this lovely stippling motion at the front. So it really does create a sense of depth and that you're going into your artwork. So you could frame that, you could trim it down and pop it on a card, whatever you want to do with it. But the thing is to just practice your watercolours and become more and more confident. Please don't be put off if it doesn't look how you want it straight away. It's practice, 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 and having some proper watercolours and some proper card make it super, super easy. So I will be back with you on Thursday for my next card making demonstration at 1 p.m. In the meantime, I want everybody to stay safe and stay warm, and I will see you next time.